Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. Get ready because we're setting the stage for an absolutely incredible journey today. We're going to be intertwining a deeply moving, real-world story of human grit with some truly cutting-edge medical science. We're exploring a pretty profound question. Can the outdoors, specifically hiking and immersing ourselves in nature, act as a literal, measurable form of medicine for cancer survivors? The way personal resilience crashes right into clinical data here is just absolutely fascinating. Let's get right into it. To really understand this, we need to start with this incredibly striking realization from Rebecca Sperry. Rebecca is an avid hiker, and she received a devastating breast cancer diagnosis right in the middle of a massive life goal. And as she so powerfully puts it, the physical and mental exhaustion you seek out in endurance sports, it completely pales in comparison to the sheer, terrifying break you experience when facing your own mortality. It is just a completely different level of survival. That brings us to our first main section, hiking through the unthinkable, a patient's personal experiment. So before her diagnosis, Rebecca was an absolute powerhouse out on the trail. She was attempting a wildly ambitious goal, tracing over 1,400 miles of trails in the rugged White Mountains of New Hampshire, all within a single calendar year. But even when cancer abruptly forced her off the trails and into the hospital, she didn't just stop moving. Despite going through grueling treatments that literally strip away your energy and your immune system, Rebecca essentially turned her illness into a personal data experiment. 700 miles. She hiked over 700 miles and tackled a mountain every single week during her chemotherapy. When the chemo made her brain foggy and her breathing incredibly heavy, she just pushed right through, meticulously logging her capacity to prove to herself and to others exactly what the human body can endure. Her personal triumph beautifully sets up our next section, the science of survivorship, moving beyond treatment. While breast cancer survival rates are definitely improving thanks to earlier diagnosis and much better treatments, the overlooked truth is that post-treatment quality of life is heavily burdened. Survival is the primary goal, obviously, but it's not the end of the patient's struggle. There is such a stark contrast between a sterile clinical list of side effects drawn from a recent BMJ Open paper and the visceral physical toll Rebecca actually faced on the trail. In a clinic, doctors call it cognitive dysfunction or fatigue, but out on the trail, for a patient, it feels like a total inability to catch your breath or clear this thick fog from your mind while you're literally trying to climb a mountain. It's a profound physical handicap. To combat these side effects, medical guidelines recommend 150 to 300 minutes of weekly physical activity for cancer survivors. But let's be honest here, there's a daunting, almost insurmountable gap between what survivors actually feel physically capable of doing after their bodies have been completely ravaged by chemo and what is strictly medically recommended. I mean, how do you bridge that gap when just getting out of bed feels like running a marathon? Well, that brings us to a really groundbreaking approach in our next section, prescribing green space, nature as the clinic. To actually bridge this physical activity gap, researchers at Cedars-Sinai launched a clinical trial protocol published in the BMJ Open that aims to take breast cancer survivors entirely out of the sterile hospital environment. The whole theory relies on shifting the environment. Instead of traditional indoor physical activity, windowless gyms or hospital rehab centers, patients are utilizing outdoor therapeutic landscapes like nature reserves and lush green spaces. The researchers are basically suggesting that treating those sterile environments for the great outdoors might not only promote better adherence to exercise routines, but also trigger deep psychosocial healing that a treadmill just cannot provide. The actual methodology of this Cedars-Sinai study is pretty straightforward. They recruit 20 women for a 12-week program. These women engage in supervised 50-minute moderate-intensity walks 3 times a week. And they aren't just walking around a parking lot. They're walking through a massive 600-acre nature reserve in Los Angeles. It's highly structured, it's consistent, and it really leverages the healing power of the natural environment. Now, let's look at how this builds a truly comprehensive picture of healing. The researchers aren't just asking if the patients feel better, they are tracking hard, objective data. The study separates its data collection into 3 main pillars: psychological well-being, cellular biomarkers like DNA methylation, and physical fitness metrics. They're trying to paint a complete picture of how moving through nature alters the human body on basically every conceivable level. There's also a very deliberate choice in who they include in this study. They specifically target survivors who are between the 3 and 21 months post-active treatment. Why? Well, they're looking to capture data exactly during the window when the protective bubble of active treatment ends and the terrifying, exhausting reality of independent recovery begins. That is very often the absolute hardest part of a survivor's journey. Which leads us to our next focus: measuring mind and body, the data of healing. Just as Rebecca treated her personal treks as a data-driven research project to see what her body could handle, clinical science is doing the exact same thing on a systemic scale. And the biological angle they're measuring is just mind-blowing. Scientists are literally tracking DNA methylation and inflammatory cytokines. In plain English, they're testing whether walking in green spaces actually alters cancer-relevant biology at the cellular level. Chemotherapy actually accelerates biological aging, so this study's asking, can this simple act of taking a walk in the woods literally reverse that accelerated cellular aging? How wild is that? And to measure the physical side of things, the study uses 3 key tests: the 6-minute walk test, hand grip strength, and a leg press. But, we shouldn't frame these just as dry, boring clinical tasks. These are objective tools specifically designed to measure the very same physical resilience, that exact same fight for breath and strength that Rebecca so vividly demonstrated every single time she dragged herself up a mountain trail in the middle of her treatment. Let's pivot back to Rebecca's personal narrative for our next section: reclaiming the hiker identity, the human element. It's absolutely vital that we remember the human experience of surviving here. Because behind every single data point measuring cytokines or grip strength, there is a real human being fighting a desperate battle to remember who they were before the disease completely took over their life. On social media, Rebecca candidly talked about the brutal shift from being hiker girl, someone who was empowered, capable, and fiercely independent, to becoming cancer girl, whose entire identity was consumed by survival and treatment schedules. She consciously used the forest and the sheer act of hiking itself as her bridge to transition back into the person she truly is at her core. To truly understand why that escape to the outdoors was so critical to her mental survival, just consider the staggering amount of medical intervention she endured. 4 biopsies, a partial mastectomy, a port placement, 25 rounds of chemotherapy, and 20 rounds of radiation. Her body was essentially a medical battleground. The trails provided the only space where she wasn't just a patient connected to machines, but a human being totally in control of her own steps. Through all of that suffering, the repetitive act of hiking through pain reminded Rebecca of her own fortitude. As she wrote, "I can face extreme physical pain and stand in the deepest, darkest places within my own mind and survive." That sentiment perfectly mirrors the concept of post-traumatic growth that the BMJ Open study is specifically trying to measure in its participants. Nature doesn't just heal the body, it restores the spirit. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful thought to take away from our explainer today. If a supervised walk in the woods has the potential to literally change the cellular biology of cancer recovery and reverse accelerated aging, how might nature heal the rest of us? I really challenge you to consider how your own relationship with green space could shape your personal healing, your identity, and your everyday resilience. Get out there, take a walk, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.